Marcus walked slowly down the dark street. His shoes had holes in them. Water came through when it rained. His clothes were dirty and torn. He had not eaten for 2 days. His stomach made loud noises because he was so hungry. The boy stopped in front of a big building. Light came from the windows. He could hear music playing inside. Beautiful piano music. Marcus pressed his face against the cold glass window. Inside he saw children his age sitting at shiny black pianos. They wore clean, white shirts and dark pants. Their hair was neat and their faces were clean. Marcus looked down at his dirty hands. His fingernails were black with dirt. His hair was messy and long. He had not taken a bath in many weeks. The music from inside made him feel warm, even though the night air was cold. He listened to every note. His fingers moved in the air like he was playing the piano too. A car stopped in front of the building. A woman got out. She wore expensive clothes and jewelry. She walked to the door without looking at Marcus. He quickly moved away from the window. He did not want her to see him. He knew people like her did not like people like him. Marcus walked around the building. He looked for a way to get warm. The music was so beautiful. He wanted to hear more. He found a small door on the side of the building. He tried the handle. It was not locked. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then he opened the door and went inside. The building was warm and clean. The floors were shiny. The walls had pictures of famous musicians. Marcus had never been in such a nice place. He could hear the piano music better now. It came from different rooms. He walked quietly down the hall. His dirty shoes made no sound on the smooth floor. Marcus found a small space behind some tall music stands. He sat down on the floor. From here, he could hear the music clearly. A girl was playing something, slow and sad. Then a boy played something fast and happy. Marcus closed his eyes and listened. For the first time in many days, he felt peaceful. He fell asleep listening to the music. When he woke up, the building was quiet. It was morning. Sunlight came through the windows. Marcus was still hidden behind the music stands. His body was stiff from sleeping on the hard floor. But he felt better than he had in weeks. He heard footsteps coming down the hall. Marcus tried to make himself smaller. He did not want to be found. The footsteps got closer. Then a man with a uniform appeared. He was carrying a mop and bucket. The man saw Marcus right away. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The man said loudly, "How did you get in?" Marcus stood up quickly. He was scared. The man grabbed his arm. "You cannot be here. This is a private school. Come on, I am taking you outside." The man pulled Marcus down the hall. Other people started to notice. Students arriving for their lessons pointed at Marcus. Teachers whispered to each other. Parents covered their noses when they saw him. Marcus felt his face get hot with shame. "Look at that dirty boy," one woman said. "How did he get in here?" Another woman pulled her daughter away from Marcus. "Do not go near him," she told her child. "He might make you sick." More people gathered as the security man dragged Marcus toward the front door. The boy tried to walk faster. He wanted to get out of there. He did not like the way people were looking at him. Their faces showed disgust and fear. "Get that kid out." "He stinks," said a woman in an expensive coat. She covered her nose with her hand. Other parents nodded and agreed. "This is not a place for street children," another man said. "What if he steals something?" Marcus felt tears in his eyes. He knew he smelled bad. He knew his clothes were dirty. But he had not hurt anyone. He had just wanted to listen to the music. The security man was almost at the front door when someone spoke up. "Wait a moment," said an old woman's voice. Everyone turned to look. A lady with white hair walked toward them. She was small and thin, but she moved with confidence. The other people seemed to respect her. They stepped aside as she approached. "What is happening here?" the old woman asked. The security man explained how he found Marcus sleeping in the building. The parents started talking at once, all saying Marcus should be removed immediately. The old woman looked at Marcus carefully. Her eyes were kind but serious. "What is your name, young man?" she asked him. Marcus was surprised. No one had asked his name. They had just called him names like Dirty Boy and Street Kid. "Marcus," he said quietly. His voice was rough because His throat was dry. The old woman nodded. I am Mrs. Whitman. I run this school. Marcus, do you know anything about music? Marcus nodded slowly. He was afraid to say too much. But something about Mrs. Whitman made him feel she might understand. I listen to music whenever I can, he said. I practice on an old keyboard I found. The parents around them started talking loudly again. They said Mrs. Whitman was wasting time. They wanted Marcus out of the building immediately. But Mrs. Whitman held up her hand for silence. Come with me, Marcus, she said. She started walking toward the main concert hall. The security man looked confused. The parents looked angry. But no one dared to argue with Mrs. Whitman. Marcus followed her down the hall. Behind them, people whispered and followed. They all wanted to see what would happen next. Marcus was scared but also curious. Why was this nice lady helping him? They entered a big room with many chairs facing a stage. On the stage was the most beautiful piano Marcus had ever seen. It was black and shiny. The top was open and he could see the strings inside. Mrs. Whitman walked onto the stage. Marcus, please come up here, she said. Marcus looked at all the people watching him. There were students, teachers, and the angry parents. They all stared at him. Some covered their noses. Others whispered about how dirty he was. Marcus climbed the steps to the stage. His legs felt weak. He had never been on a stage before. The piano was even more beautiful up close. Mrs. Whitman sat on the bench and patted the space next to her. Sit down, Marcus, she said gently. Show us what you can do. Marcus sat on the edge of the bench. He was afraid to touch the beautiful piano with his dirty hands. What if he broke it? What if he could not play it? The people in the audience were getting impatient. Someone said, "This is ridiculous. Just call the police." Another person said, "We do not have time for this nonsense." Mrs. Whitman looked at Marcus. "Do not listen to them," she said softly. "Just play what is in your heart." Marcus took a deep breath. He had learned a beautiful song by listening to it many times outside concert halls. He had practiced it on his broken keyboard until he knew every note. Marcus placed his dirty fingers on the clean white keys. The room became very quiet. Even the angry parents stopped talking. Marcus closed his eyes and began to play. The first notes were soft and sweet. Then the music grew stronger and more complex. Marcus played Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. His technique was not perfect. He had never had lessons. But every note came from his heart. The music told the story of his hard life on the streets. It spoke of loneliness and hunger. But it also spoke of hope and dreams. The audience sat frozen in their seats. No one moved. No one spoke. The beautiful music filled the room and touched their hearts. Some people had tears in their eyes. They had never heard such emotional playing from someone so young. When Marcus finished, the room was completely silent. He opened his eyes and looked at the audience. Their faces had changed. They were no longer looking at him with disgust. They were looking at him with wonder and respect. Then Mrs. Whitman started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. Soon the whole room was applauding. Some people stood up. Marcus could not believe it. These same people who had wanted him thrown out were now clapping for him. A reporter who had been visiting the school took pictures and wrote down notes. Within hours, Marcus's story was in the newspaper. People read about the homeless boy who played piano like an angel. The story spread to television and radio. The Harmony Music Academy offered Marcus a full scholarship. A kind family volunteered to give him a home. Mrs. Whitman became his teacher and mentor. She helped him learn proper technique while keeping the emotion that made his playing special. 6 months later, Marcus gave his first official concert in the same hall where people had once called him dirty and unwanted. He wore a clean black suit and his hair was neat. But when he played, the same raw emotion poured out of the music. The audience included many of the same parents who had wanted him removed that first day. They clapped the loudest of all. They had learned that talent and beauty can come from the most unexpected places. Marcus had taught them that they should never judge someone by how they look. Marcus's life had completely changed. He went from being homeless and hungry to having a family in the future, But he never forgot those hard days on the street. They had made him who he was. And they had given him the deep emotions that made his music so powerful. Mrs. Whitman always said that Marcus taught her and everyone else an important lesson that day. True talent does not care about dirty clothes or bad smells. It comes from the heart and the soul. And when real talent appears, everyone must stop and listen. Marcus woke up shivering on the cold street. The sun was just coming up. His stomach hurt from not eating. He had spent another night sleeping behind garbage cans in the alley. The smell of fresh bread came from a bakery nearby. It made him feel even more hungry. He walked past the same music school he had seen the night before. Through the windows he could see people cleaning inside. Workers were setting up chairs and music stands. Marcus watched them prepare for another day of lessons. The boy found some old newspapers in a trash can. He used them to cover his feet inside his broken shoes. The paper would help keep his feet warm and dry. Then he walked around the building, again looking for any way to get inside where it was warm. Behind the school, Marcus found some boxes that delivery trucks had left. He made a small shelter with them. From this hiding place, he could hear the music when students started arriving. The sound of pianos drifted out through the windows. As the morning went on, more cars arrived. Parents dropped off their children. At the front door, the children all looked clean and healthy. They carried expensive music books and wore nice clothes. Marcus touched his own dirty shirt and felt ashamed. One little girl dropped her music book as she got out of her car. The wind blew the pages around. Marcus ran to help her collect them. But when the girl saw him, she screamed and ran to her. "Mother, Mommy, a dirty boy touched my music," the girl cried. Her mother looked at Marcus with anger and fear. "Stay away from my daughter," she said in a loud voice. "Security! There is a homeless person bothering the children." Marcus ran back to his hiding place behind the boxes. His heart was beating fast. He felt scared and embarrassed. He just wanted to help the little girl. But she was afraid of him because he looked different. A security guard came outside and looked around. Marcus made himself very small behind the boxes. The guard walked around the building but did not find him. After a while, the guard went back inside. Marcus stayed hidden for most of the day. He listened to the beautiful music coming from the school. Sometimes he hummed along quietly. His fingers moved in the air like he was playing piano too. The music made him forget about being hungry and cold. When it started to get dark, most of the students went home. The building became quieter. Marcus waited until he was sure no one was watching. Then he crept to the same side door he had seen before. He tried the handle very carefully. It was still unlocked. Marcus slipped inside the warm building. The halls were empty now, only a few lights were on. He could hear one piano still playing somewhere. Someone was practicing alone in one of the rooms. He found his hiding place behind the music stands again. The floor was hard, but it was better than sleeping outside in the cold. Marcus curled up and closed his eyes. He listened to the last student practicing scales over and over. Soon the building was completely quiet. Marcus fell asleep to the sound of silence. He dreamed about playing piano on a big stage while people clapped for him. In the morning, Marcus woke up to the sound of footsteps. Someone was walking down the hall with heavy boots. The boy tried to stay very still and quiet. Maybe the person would not see him, but the footsteps stopped right near his hiding place. Then a man in a uniform appeared. He was holding a mop and had keys hanging from his belt. The janitor looked surprised and then angry when he saw Marcus. "What are you doing here, kid?" the man said loudly. "This is private property. You cannot sleep here." He grabbed Marcus by the arm and pulled him to his feet. "How did you get in? Did you break something to get inside?" Marcus tried to explain that the door was unlocked, but the janitor was not listening. He dragged the boy toward the front of the building. His grip was tight and it hurt Marcus's arm. "I'm calling the police," the janitor said as they walked. "They will know what to do with you. Street kids like you always cause trouble." As they reached the main hallway, other people started to notice them. Students were arriving for their morning lessons. Teachers were setting up their classrooms. Parents were dropping off their children. Everyone stopped what they were doing to stare at Marcus. He felt their eyes on his dirty clothes and messy hair. He could see the disgust on their faces. Some people whispered to each other and pointed at him. "Look at that homeless boy," one woman said to her friend. "How did he get in here? This is supposed to be a safe place for our children." A teacher came over to see what was happening. "Is everything all right?" she asked the janitor. When she saw Marcus, her face showed shock and concern. "Oh my goodness, where did he come from?" More people gathered around them. Marcus felt trapped and scared. Everyone was talking about him like he was not there. They used words like dirty and dangerous and disgusting. The janitor kept pulling Marcus toward the front door. "I found him sleeping in the music room area," he explained to everyone. "He probably stole some food from the kitchen, too. These street kids always steal." Marcus wanted to tell them he had not stolen anything. He had not even been near the kitchen, but his voice felt stuck in his throat. He was too scared and embarrassed to speak. A man in an expensive stepped forward. "This is unacceptable," he said in an angry voice. "How can a vagrant break into our children's school? What about security? What about safety?" Other parents nodded and agreed with him. They started demanding answers from the teachers and staff. Everyone was upset and worried. They all wanted Marcus removed from the building immediately. "Get that kid out. He stinks," said a woman wearing lots of jewelry. She held her hand over her nose like Marcus smelled terrible. Other people did the same thing. They acted like being near him would make them sick. Marcus felt tears starting in his eyes. He knew he smelled bad because he had not been able to take a bath. He knew his clothes were dirty because he had no way to wash them, but he was still a person. He still had feelings. The janitor was almost at the front door when a calm voice spoke up. "Wait just a moment, please." Everyone turned to see who was talking. An elderly woman with white hair was walking toward them. She moved slowly but with confidence. All the angry parents and upset teachers became quiet when they saw her. Marcus could tell this woman was important. Even the janitor stopped pulling him and waited for her to speak. "What seems to be the problem?" "Here?" the old woman asked. Her voice was gentle but firm. The janitor quickly explained how he found Marcus sleeping in the building. The parents started complaining again about security and safety. The woman listened to everyone without interrupting. Then she looked directly at Marcus. Her eyes were kind and intelligent. She did not look at him with disgust like the other people did. "What is your name, young man?" she asked Marcus. Her question surprised everyone. No one else had bothered to ask his name. They had just called him street kid and vagrant. "Marcus," he answered quietly. His voice was rough because his mouth was dry. He had not had anything to drink since yesterday. The woman nodded like his name was important to her. "I am Mrs. Whitman," she said. "I am the director of this academy. Tell me, Marcus, do you have any interest in music?" Marcus nodded quickly. Music was the most important thing in his life, even though he had never been able to learn properly. "I love music more than anything," he said. Not the parents around them started protesting loudly. They said Mrs. Whitman was wasting time. They wanted Marcus thrown out immediately. Some threatened to take their children to a different school if the situation was not handled properly, but Mrs. Whitman held up her hand for silence. When she did this, everyone stopped talking. Marcus could see that all these important people respected her very much. "Come with me, Marcus," Mrs. Whitman said. She started walking toward the concert hall. The boy followed her, even though he was confused and scared. Behind them, all the angry people followed too. They wanted to see what would happen next. The concert hall was the most beautiful room Marcus had ever seen. Red velvet chairs faced a stage with a magnificent black piano. The piano was so shiny he could see his reflection in it. It was much bigger and more beautiful than any piano he had ever seen. Mrs. Whitman walked onto the stage and sat at the piano bench. She patted the space beside her. "Please join me, Marcus," she said kindly. Marcus looked at all the people watching him from the audience. Their faces still showed anger and disgust. "I cannot," Marcus said. My hands are too dirty. I will ruin your beautiful piano." He was afraid to touch something so expensive and perfect with his dirty fingers. Music does not care about dirty hands, Mrs. Whitman said with a smile. Music only cares about what is in your heart. Please, sit down and show us what you can do. Marcus climbed the steps to the stage. His legs felt weak and shaky. He had never been on a stage before. All those people were staring at him and waiting. Some were checking their watches like they had better things to do. He sat on the edge of the piano bench. The piano keys were so white and clean. His hands looked terrible next to them. But Mrs. Whitman encouraged him with a gentle nod. Marcus closed his eyes and placed his fingers on the keys. The room became completely silent. Even the people who had been whispering stopped talking. Marcus took a deep breath and began to play. The music that came from the piano was like magic. Marcus played a piece by Chopin that he had learned by listening outside concert halls. His technique was not perfect because he had never had real lessons. The janitor's grip on Marcus's arm was tight and painful. The man pulled him down the long hallway toward the front entrance of the music academy. Marcus tried to keep up, but his worn-out shoes kept slipping on the polished floor. He could feel the eyes of everyone watching him as they walked. Students were arriving for their morning lessons. They carried shiny instrument cases and neat folders full of sheet music. Their uniforms were perfectly pressed and their shoes were polished black. When they saw Marcus being dragged by the janitor, they stopped and stared. A group of teenage girls whispered to each other behind their hands. One of them pointed at Marcus and wrinkled her nose. "Gross," she said loud enough for him to hear. "How did someone like that get in here?" Her friends giggled and moved away when Marcus looked in their direction. Teachers began to notice the commotion. A woman with glasses and a stern face came out of her classroom. "What is going on here? Mr. Johnson?" she asked the janitor. When she saw Marcus, her expression changed to one of shock and disgust. "Found this one sleeping in the building, Mrs. Patterson," the janitor replied. "Must have broken in during the night. Probably looking for things to steal." Marcus wanted to tell them that he had not stolen anything. He had not even touched anything except the floor where he slept. But his throat felt dry and tight. The words would not come out. More teachers gathered in the hallway. They talked about Marcus like he was not standing right there in front of them. "How terrible," one said. "What if he has diseases? What if he hurt one of our students?" Another teacher shook her head sadly. "These street children are always trouble. They cannot help themselves." The hallway was getting crowded now. Parents who were dropping off their children for lessons stopped to see what was happening. Marcus could smell their expensive perfumes and colognes. It made him more aware of his own smell. He knew he needed a bath badly, but there was nowhere for him to wash. A man in a business suit pushed forward to get a better look. "Is that a homeless child?" he asked loudly. "How did he get past security? This is supposed to be a safe place for our children." Other parents began to murmur in agreement. Their voices grew louder and more upset. "I pay good money to send my daughter here," said a woman wearing diamond earrings. "I expect the school to keep these kinds of people out." What if he had hurt someone? What if he had stolen valuable instruments? She held her purse tightly against her body as if Marcus might grab it. The janitor kept pulling Marcus forward. With each step, more people joined the crowd following them. Marcus felt like an animal in a zoo that everyone had come to stare at. He wished he could disappear or run away, but the janitor's grip was too strong. A young boy about Marcus's age was standing with his mother near the front entrance. He looked at Marcus with curiosity rather than disgust. "Mom, why is everyone so upset about that boy?" he asked innocently. His mother quickly pulled him away. "Do not look at him, Timothy," she said in a sharp voice. "And do not ask questions about such things. He is not the kind of person you should be thinking about." She covered the boy's eyes with her hand and hurried him into a practice room. More parents were arriving for the morning drop-off. Word spread quickly through the crowd about the dirty street boy who had broken into their exclusive academy. Each person who heard the story seemed to make it worse in the telling. I heard he was trying to steal pianos, one parent said to another. Someone told me he was probably on drugs, said a different person. My friend thinks he might be dangerous and violent, added a third voice. None of these things were true, but the stories grew bigger and scarier with each telling. Marcus felt, his face burning with shame. These people did not know anything about him, but they were making up terrible stories. He wanted to tell them that he was not a thief or dangerous. He just loved music and wanted to be warm. But no one was interested in hearing his side of the story. A woman with perfectly styled hair and expensive clothes stepped directly in front of the janitor. She was holding the hand of a little girl who looked scared and confused. "Excuse me," the woman said in a demanding voice. "I need to know exactly what happened here." The janitor stopped walking and explained again how he had found Marcus sleeping behind the music stands. As he talked, more parents gathered around to listen. The woman's face became more and more angry as she heard the details. "This is completely unacceptable," she declared when the janitor finished. "How are we supposed to trust the safety of our children if vagrants can just walk into the building whenever they please?" She looked at Marcus with such hatred that he took a step backward. Her little girl tugged on her mother's coat. "Mommy, why does that boy look so sad?" she asked in a sweet voice. "Is he hurt? Does he need help?" The innocence of the child's questions made some of the adults look uncomfortable for a moment, but the woman pulled her daughter closer to her. "Hush, Sophia," she said firmly. "That boy is not our concern. He should not be here, and we do not need to worry about him." She glared at the janitor. "Just get him out of here immediately." Other parents began to voice their complaints loudly. "This never should have happened," said one father. "What kind of security do you have here?" demanded another mother. "Are there other homeless people hiding in the building?" asked a third parent. The questions came fast and angry. Marcus tried to make himself smaller as the adults argued around him. He wished he had never come into the building. He wished he had just stayed cold and hungry outside rather than face this humiliation. The weight of their stares and harsh words felt heavier than all his days of hunger. A teenage boy with slicked back hair pointed at Marcus and laughed. "Look at his clothes," he said to his friends. "I think those pants used to be blue, but now they're just brown with dirt." His friends joined in the laughter. "And look at his hair," another teenager added. "It looks like birds have been nesting in it." Their cruel laughter hurt Marcus worse than being hungry or cold. He had always tried to stay clean, but living on the streets made it almost impossible. He washed his face and hands in public restrooms when he could. But he had no soap, no clean clothes, and no place to take a real bath. An elderly man with a walking cane shook his head as he looked at Marcus. "In my day, children like this would be in orphanages where they belong," he said to anyone who would listen. "They would not be allowed to wander the streets bothering decent people." A mother holding a baby moved her child to her other arm away from Marcus. "I hope he does not have any contagious diseases," she said, worried. "What if he breathes on our children? What if he touches something that our kids touch later?" Her fear seemed to spread to other parents. The crowd was getting more agitated by the minute. Some parents threatened to remove their children from the school if security was not improved. Others demanded to speak to the director immediately. A few suggested calling the police to arrest Marcus for breaking and entering. Through all the noise and anger, Marcus heard someone say the words that cut him the deepest. A well-dressed woman in a fur coat looked right at him with disgust written all over her face. She did not even try to lower her voice when she spoke. "Get that kid out." "He stinks," she said loudly, making sure everyone could hear her. She covered her nose with her hand and turned her head away like the smell was making her sick. "I cannot stand being in the same room with him for another second." Other people began to cover their noses too. Some used their hands, others used handkerchiefs or scarves. A few parents actually backed away from Marcus like he was carrying some terrible disease that might spread to them. Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes, but he forced them not to fall. He would not cry in front of these people who already thought he was weak and worthless. He bit his lip hard and focused on a spot on the floor. He tried to pretend he was somewhere else, somewhere far away from all this hatred. The woman in the fur coat was not finished with her cruelty. "Seriously," she continued, "the smell is making me sick to my stomach. How can anyone live like that? It is disgusting and wrong." She fanned the air in front of her face dramatically. Her words seemed to give permission for others to be even meaner. "He probably has not had a bath in months," said one man. "Look at those fingernails," pointed out a woman. "They are completely black with dirt." Another person added, "And his hair looks like it has things living in it." Marcus felt his face burning red with embarrassment. Every cruel word hit him like a physical blow. He knew they were right about how he looked and smelled, but he also knew it was not his choice. He would give anything for a hot bath, clean clothes, and a warm bed. But those things cost money that he did not have. The janitor seemed to be enjoying the attention and drama. He held Marcus's arm even tighter and addressed the crowd like he was giving a speech. "Do not worry, folks," he announced. "I will have this little vagrant out of here in just a few more steps. He will not bother your children anymore." Just as they reached the front entrance, just as the janitor was about to push Marcus out into the cold morning air, a calm voice cut through all the noise and anger. "Wait just a moment, please," the voice said with quiet authority. Everyone in the crowd turned to see who had spoken. The angry voices became silent. The elderly woman with white hair moved through the crowd with quiet confidence. People stepped aside to let her pass. Marcus could see that everyone respected her, even the angry parents who had been shouting just moments before. The woman was small and thin, but she carried herself like someone who was used to being in charge. "Mrs. Whitman," the janitor said nervously when he saw her approaching. He loosened his grip on Marcus's arm slightly. "I was just removing this vagrant from the building. He broke in last night and was sleeping in the music rooms." Mrs. Whitman looked at the janitor with calm eyes. "I can see what you are doing, Mr. Johnson," she said in a gentle but firm voice. "But I would like to understand the situation better before we take any action." She turned her attention to Marcus, and he felt surprised by the kindness in her gaze. The parents around them began talking at once, all trying to explain to Mrs. Whitman why Marcus needed to be removed immediately. Their voices overlapped and grew louder as each person tried to make their point heard above the others. "Mrs. Whitman, this is a serious security issue," said the man in the business suit. "If homeless people can just walk into our school, what does that say about the safety of our children?" He gestured toward Marcus like he was pointing at a dangerous animal. The woman in the fur coat stepped forward and addressed Mrs. Whitman directly. "I have been sending my daughter here for 3 years," she said in a demanding tone. "I pay a lot of money for her lessons, and I expect certain standards to be maintained. This situation is completely unacceptable." Other parents joined in with their complaints. "What if he stole something?" asked one mother. "What if he hurt one of the students?" worried another father. "How do we know there are not more of them hiding somewhere in the building?" demanded a third parent. Mrs. Whitman listened to all of their concerns without interrupting. She nodded occasionally to show that she was paying attention, but she did not seem rushed or worried like the other adults. When the voices finally died down, she spoke in the same calm tone. "I understand your concerns," she said to the group. "The safety and security of our students is very important to all of us. But before we make any decisions, I think we should hear from this young man himself." She looked directly at Marcus again. The parents seemed shocked by this suggestion. "What could he possibly have to say that matters?" asked one father incredulously. "He is just a street kid who broke into our school," added a mother with disgust in her voice, but Mrs. Whitman ignored their protests. She took a step closer to Marcus, who was still being held by the janitor. "What is your name, young man?" she asked in a voice that was both gentle and interested. Marcus was surprised by the question. In all the time he had been dragged through the building, no one had bothered to ask his name. They had called him vagrant and street kid and that boy, but no one had treated him like a real person with a real name. "Marcus," he answered quietly. His voice was rough and hoarse because he was scared and his throat was dry. He looked down at the floor as he spoke, afraid to meet Mrs. Whitman's eyes directly. Marcus, Mrs. Whitman repeated, as if she was testing. How the name sounded? That is a good, strong name. Marcus, I am Mrs. Eleanor Whitman. I am the director of this academy. She paused for a moment. Can you tell me how you came to be in our building this morning? The janitor started to answer for Marcus, but Mrs. Whitman held up her hand to stop him. I would like to hear from Marcus himself, she said firmly. The janitor looked frustrated but remained quiet. Marcus glanced up at Mrs. Whitman's face. Her expression was patient and encouraging. He had not seen a kind face in so long that it almost made him want to cry. I was cold, he said simply. I found a door that was not locked. I just wanted to get warm and listen to the music. Listen to the music? Mrs. Whitman asked with interest. You enjoy music, then? This question seemed to surprise the parents around them. They had not expected the conversation to turn in this direction. Marcus nodded eagerly. For the first time since being discovered, he felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this woman would understand. I love music more than anything, he said, his voice growing slightly stronger. I listen whenever I can. Sometimes I stand outside concert halls just to hear the sounds coming through the walls. The woman in the fur coat made a noise of impatience. Mrs. Whitman, with all due respect, what does this have to do with anything? The boy broke into our school. Whether he likes music or not does not change that fact, other parents murmured in agreement. We do not have time for this, said one father, checking his watch. Some of us have important meetings to get to. Mother added, our children are waiting for their lessons to start. This delay is disrupting the entire schedule. But Mrs. Whitman seemed completely unbothered by their complaints. She continued to focus her attention on Marcus. Tell me more about your interest in music, Marcus. Do you play any instruments? Marcus hesitated. He was embarrassed to admit the truth about his musical experience. I practice on an old keyboard I found in a dumpster, he said softly. Most of the keys do not work anymore, but I pretend they do. I make up songs and try to copy pieces I have heard. Several people in the crowd laughed at this admission. A broken keyboard from a dumpster, one teenager said mockingly. How pathetic is that? His friends joined in the laughter, making Marcus feel small and foolish, but Mrs. Whitman did not laugh. Instead, her eyes seemed to light up with genuine interest. You taught yourself to play? She asked. Without lessons or a proper instrument? When Marcus nodded, she looked impressed rather than amused. Mrs. Whitman, interrupted the man in the business suit, I really must insist that we end this conversation and deal with the security breach properly. This boy needs to be removed from the premises immediately. The woman with the baby spoke up as well. My daughter's lesson was supposed to start 10 minutes ago. Her teacher is waiting. We cannot keep disrupting everyone's schedule for this nonsense. Mrs. Whitman looked around at all the frustrated faces surrounding her. Marcus could see that she was thinking carefully about what to do next. The pressure from the parents was growing stronger, and even some of the teachers looked like they wanted this situation to end quickly. I understand that everyone is eager to get on with their day, Mrs. Whitman said diplomatically. But sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected places. She paused and looked at Marcus again. Tell me, Marcus, what kind of music do you like best? Marcus thought about all the different pieces he had heard over the months of listening outside concert halls and music schools. I like the sad, beautiful pieces best, he said honestly. The ones that make you feel things deep inside. Like, the music is telling a story about someone's life. Chopin, perhaps? Mrs. Whitman suggested. Beethoven? Bach? Marcus's eyes widened with recognition. He knew those names from listening to radio programs late at night when he could find a working radio. Yes, he said with excitement, especially Chopin. There is one piece that sounds like it is crying and hoping at the same time. I heard it many times outside the big concert hall downtown. I practiced it on my broken keyboard until I could play almost all of it. The parents around them were becoming more agitated by the minute. "This is ridiculous," said one mother loudly. "We are wasting time talking about music with a homeless child when we should be calling the police." "He probably does not even know what he is talking about," added a father dismissively. "Street kids lie all the time to get sympathy. He probably never heard real classical music in his life." But Mrs. Whitman held up her hand for silence. When she did this, the entire crowd became quiet, even the most angry parents. Marcus could tell that everyone respected her authority, even when they disagreed with her decisions. "I have an idea," Mrs. Whitman said thoughtfully. "Marcus, would you be willing to show us what you have learned? Would you be willing to play? For us?" She gestured toward the hallway that led to the concert hall. The suggestion caused an immediate uproar among the parents. "Absolutely not," said the woman in the fur coat. "I will not allow this dirty child to touch our expensive instruments." Other voices joined in with similar protests. "What if he breaks something?" worried one parent. "What if he has diseases?" "That could spread to the piano keys?" asked another. "This is completely inappropriate," declared a third. Marcus felt his heart sink. For a brief moment he had thought maybe someone understood him. But now he realized that even Mrs. Whitman could not help him against so many angry people. He looked down at his dirty hands and dirty clothes and felt ashamed all over again. But Mrs. Whitman was not finished. "Music is not about clean hands or expensive clothes," she said firmly to the crowd. "Music is about the heart and the soul. If this young man has taught himself to play Chopin on a broken keyboard, then I think we owe it to ourselves to listen." She turned back to Marcus with an encouraging smile. "What do you say, Marcus? Will you show us what music means to you?" Her voice was warm and supportive, making him feel like maybe, just maybe, someone finally believed in him. Marcus looked around at all the faces staring at him. Most of them still showed anger, disgust, or impatience. But Mrs. Whitman's face showed something different. Something that looked like hope and curiosity and genuine care. Mrs. Whitman led the group down a long hallway lined with portraits of famous composers. Marcus walked beside her, trying not to look at all the angry faces following behind them. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. He had never been the center of so much attention, and most of it was not the good kind. The parents continued to complain as they walked. "This is completely inappropriate," said one mother to another. "We should not be encouraging this behavior." A father shook his head and muttered, "What kind of message does this send to our children?" The woman in the fur coat was especially upset. "Mrs. Whitman, I must protest this decision," she said loudly. "That boy has no business touching our instruments. What if he damages something? What if he steals something while we are all watching?" "But—" Mrs. Whitman kept walking without responding to the complaints. Marcus could see that she was determined to follow through with her plan, no matter how many people disagreed with her. Her quiet confidence made him feel a little braver. Even though his hands were still shaking, they reached two large wooden doors with brass handles. Mrs. Whitman pushed them open to reveal the most beautiful room Marcus had ever seen. The concert hall was magnificent, with red velvet seats arranged in perfect rows facing a raised stage. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting warm light throughout the space, but what took Marcus's breath away was the piano on the stage. It was a grand piano, black and shiny like a mirror. The top was open, revealing the strings inside that caught the light like silver threads. It was at least 10 times bigger than any piano Marcus had ever seen, even from a distance. Oh, he whispered without meaning to speak out loud. His eyes were wide with wonder as he stared at the magnificent instrument. He had dreamed of seeing a piano like this up close, but he had never imagined it would actually happen. The parents filed into the seats, most of them still grumbling and checking their watches. Some sat with their arms crossed, making it clear they did not want to be there. Others whispered to each other about how ridiculous the whole situation was, the teenagers who had been making fun of. Marcus earlier found seats in the back row. "This should be entertaining," one of them said with a mean laugh. "I bet he does not even know which end of the piano to use." His friends snickered at the joke. A few teachers had also joined the audience. They sat quietly, unsure what to think about the unusual situation. Some looked curious, while others seemed worried about what might happen to the expensive piano. Mrs. Whitman walked onto the stage and gestured for Marcus to follow her. The stage felt enormous under his feet. The lights were brighter up there, and he could see all the faces in the audience staring at him. Most of them looked impatient or annoyed. A few looked disgusted. Only Mrs. Whitman looked encouraging. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Whitman addressed the audience, "we are about to hear from a young musician who has taught himself to play through pure love of music. I ask that you listen with open hearts and minds." The woman in the fur coat stood up in her seat. "Mrs. Whitman, I object to this entire proceeding," she announced loudly. "This is not what we signed up for when we enrolled our children in this academy. I demand that you stop this nonsense immediately." Other parents voiced their agreement. "This is a waste of time," said one man. "We have places to be," added a woman. "Our children need to get to their lessons," complained another parent. But Mrs. Whitman remained calm and patient. "I understand your concerns," she said to the audience. "But sometimes the most important education happens when we least expect it. I believe this young man has something valuable to teach all of us today." She turned to Marcus and spoke more quietly. "The piano is yours, Marcus. Play whatever is in your heart." She gestured toward the piano bench, which was covered in smooth black leather. Marcus looked at the beautiful piano and then at his dirty hands. The contrast was shocking. His fingernails were black with dirt, and his clothes were stained and torn. He felt like he did not belong anywhere near such a perfect, expensive instrument. "I cannot," he said to Mrs. Whitman, his voice barely above a whisper. "My hands are too dirty. I will ruin your beautiful piano. Everyone is right. I do not belong." Here, from the audience, someone called out, "Finally, the boy is showing some sense." Another voice added, "Now can we please end this charade and get back to our normal schedule?" But Mrs. Whitman knelt down so she was at Marcus's eye level. "Listen to me carefully," she said in a gentle but firm voice. "This piano has been played by thousands of hands over the years. Some were clean, some were dirty. Some belonged to rich people, some to poor people. But the piano does not care about any of that. It only cares about the music that comes from the player's heart." Marcus looked into her kind eyes and saw something he had not seen in a very long time. He saw someone who believed in him. Someone who thought he might be worth something after all. The feeling was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at the same time. "Are you sure?" he asked, still uncertain. The audience was getting more restless by the minute. Some people were standing up like they were ready to leave. Others were checking their phones and looking bored. "I am absolutely sure," Mrs. Whitman said with a warm smile. "Music is not about having perfect clothes or perfect manners. It is about having something real to say and the courage to say it. I think you have both of those things, Marcus." Marcus took a deep breath and walked slowly toward the piano. Each step felt heavy and important. The audience grew quieter as they watched him approach the beautiful instrument. Even the people who had been complaining seemed curious about what would happen next. He sat down on the edge of the piano bench, afraid to get too comfortable. The bench was much nicer than anything he had ever sat on. It was soft and smooth, nothing like the hard surfaces he was used to sleeping on. Marcus stared at the piano keys for a long moment. They were so perfectly white and clean. His hands looked terrible in comparison. He could hear people shifting in their seats behind him, growing impatient with his hesitation. "Just get on with it," someone called out from the audience. "We do not have all day to wait for you to make up your mind." Other voices joined in with similar complaints, but Marcus was not stalling because he was trying to waste time. He was trying to remember everything he had learned from his broken keyboard. He was trying to find the courage to play in front of all these people who did not want him there. He thought about all the nights he had spent practicing on his damaged instrument. Most of the keys did not work, but he had learned to hear the missing notes in his mind. He had played the same pieces over and over until his fingers knew exactly where to go. Even when no sound came out, Marcus closed his eyes and placed his hands above the keys. He could feel the warmth radiating from the piano, as if it was alive and waiting for him to bring it to life with music. For a moment he forgot about the angry audience behind him. He forgot about his dirty clothes and empty stomach. He forgot about everything except the music he was about to create. "Here goes nothing," he whispered to himself. Then he lowered his fingers to the keys and began to play. The first note that came from the piano was pure and clear and beautiful. It filled the concert hall with a sound that was richer and more wonderful than anything Marcus had ever heard from his broken keyboard. The difference was like comparing a whisper to a shout, or a candle to the sun. Marcus had chosen to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the piece he had practiced more than any other. He had heard it performed by master pianists outside concert halls, and he had worked for months to learn every note by memory on his damaged instrument. As the melody began to unfold, something magical started to happen in the concert hall. The restless shuffling and annoyed whispers from the audience gradually stopped. One by one, people began to pay attention to the music instead of their complaints. Marcus's technique was not perfect. He had never had proper lessons, so his finger positions were not always correct. Sometimes he played notes a little too hard or too soft. But what came through his playing was something that could not be taught in any classroom. Every note he played carried the weight of his experiences. The loneliness of sleeping in cold alleys, the hunger of going days without food, the pain of being rejected and despised by people who judged him only by his appearance, but also the hope that kept him alive, the dreams that refused to die, the love of music that burned bright inside him despite everything he had endured. The audience began to realize they were hearing something extraordinary. This was not just a homeless boy playing piano. This was a young artist pouring his soul into music, creating something beautiful from all the ugliness he had experienced. Parents who had been checking their watches stopped looking at the time. Teenagers who had been making jokes fell silent. Teachers who had been worried about their schedules forgot about everything except the music filling the room. Mrs. Whitman stood at the side of the stage with tears beginning to form in her eyes. She had suspected that Marcus might have talent, but she had not expected anything like this. She was witnessing something rare and precious, the kind of moment that reminded her why she had devoted her life to music education. As Marcus continued to play, his confidence grew. As Marcus continued to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, something incredible began to happen in the concert hall. The music seemed to change the very air in the room. What had started as an angry, uncomfortable gathering was slowly transforming into something else entirely. The melody flowed from Marcus's fingers like water finding its way down a mountain. Each note was perfectly placed, even though his technique was not formally trained. The emotion behind every phrase was so powerful that it reached into the hearts of everyone listening, whether they wanted it to or not. Marcus himself seemed to change as he played. The scared, dirty boy who had been dragged through the hallways was disappearing. In his place sat a young musician who belonged at that piano. His shoulders straightened. His breathing became deeper and more relaxed. His face, which had been tight with fear and shame, now showed only concentration and joy. The woman in the fur coat, who had been the loudest critic of the whole situation, found herself leaning forward in her seat. She had been ready to storm out of the hall in protest, but now she could not move. The music held her in place like invisible chains made of beauty and emotion. Her daughter, little Sophia, tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, "the sad boy is making the piano cry happy tears. Listen to how pretty it sounds." The child's innocent words made her mother realize that she had been hearing the same thing. The music was indeed like crying, but it was the kind of crying that comes with relief and hope. In the back row, the teenagers who had been making cruel jokes about Marcus were completely silent now. One of them, a boy named Tyler who played piano himself, recognized the incredible difficulty of the piece Marcus was performing. Tyler had been trying to learn the same Chopin ballade for over a year with expensive private lessons, and he still could not play it nearly as well as this. Homeless Boy was playing it right now. How is he doing that? Tyler whispered to his friend in amazement. I have been studying piano for 8 years, and I cannot play like that. How did he learn to play with so much feeling? His friend could only shake his head in wonder. They had both completely forgotten about their earlier mockery. The businessman who had been so concerned about security issues sat with his mouth slightly open. He prided himself on being practical and logical, not easily moved by emotional displays. But something about this music was reaching past all his defenses. It reminded him of his own childhood, when he used to dream of being a musician before practical concerns took over his life. Mrs. Patterson, the stern teacher with glasses who had been worried about diseases and proper procedures, felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. She had taught music for 30 years, and she had heard thousands of student performances. But she had never heard anything quite like this. This boy was not just playing notes correctly. He was using music to tell the story of his life. As the piece continued, Marcus seemed to forget completely that anyone was watching him. He was lost in the music, transported to a place where hunger and cold and cruel words could not reach him. His fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence. The broken keyboard he had practiced on was forgotten. This Rio piano responded to his every touch, giving voice to emotions he had carried inside for so long. The melody moved through different sections, each one more beautiful than the last. Sometimes the music was soft and gentle like a lullaby, sung to comfort a frightened child. Other times it grew powerful and dramatic, like a storm breaking over the ocean. Marcus navigated every change with natural instinct, never having learned the formal names for the musical techniques he was using. In the middle section of the piece, the music became especially sad and haunting. Marcus played this part with such deep feeling that several people in the audience began to cry openly. The notes seemed to speak of all the pain and loneliness that a young person should never have to experience. Every adult in the room found themselves thinking about their own comfortable lives and feeling ashamed of how they had treated this boy. The janitor, Mr. Johnson, who had discovered Marcus that morning, stood at the back of the hall with his mop still in his hand. He had been so angry about finding an intruder in the building. He had been ready to call the police and have Marcus arrested. Now he felt terrible about his harsh treatment. This was not a criminal or a troublemaker. This was a gifted young musician who had simply been looking for a warm place to sleep. Mrs. Whitman watched from the side of the stage with tears streaming down her face. In all her years as a music educator, she had never witnessed anything quite like this. She had seen talented students and gifted performers. But Marcus was something different. He was a natural artist who had developed his abilities through pure love and determination, without any of the advantages that the other students took for granted. As the music moved toward its climax, Marcus's playing became more intense and passionate. His whole body was involved now, swaying gently with the rhythm, his face showing the deep concentration of a master musician. The piano responded to his touch like it was singing, producing sounds of incredible beauty and power. The parents who had been so eager to have Marcus removed from the building now sat in stunned silence. They had judged him based on his appearance, his smell, and his obvious poverty. They had assumed he was worthless, dangerous, maybe even mentally unstable. But the music pouring from the piano proved how wrong they had been. One father, a successful lawyer who had been particularly vocal about wanting Marcus thrown out, found himself remembering his own father's words from many years ago. "Son," his father had said, "never judge a book by its cover because you might miss reading the most important story of your life." The Leah had forgotten that advice somewhere along the way, but Marcus's music was reminding him of its truth. A mother who had pulled her child away from Marcus earlier now felt ashamed of her actions. She had taught her daughter to be kind to everyone, but when faced with a real test of that lesson, she had failed completely. The beautiful music made her realize that kindness and worth could come from the most unexpected places. As the piece approached its ending, Marcus seemed to pour everything he had into the final passages. The music grew softer and more delicate, like a prayer being whispered in the darkness. Each note was placed with perfect timing and infinite care. The audience held their breath, afraid that any sound might break the spell that had been cast. Over the entire room, the last few measures of the ballade were played with such tenderness and beauty that several people had to cover their mouths to keep from sobbing out loud. Marcus's playing had taken them on an emotional journey through pain and struggle, but also through hope and redemption. The music seemed to say that no matter how dark things became, there was always the possibility of beauty and joy. When Marcus played the final note, he held it for a long moment, letting it fade away naturally into silence. Then he slowly lifted his hands from the keys and sat perfectly still. The hall remained completely quiet. No one moved. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. Marcus opened his eyes and looked out at the audience for the first time since he had begun playing. What he saw shocked him completely. The same people who had been calling him names and demanding his removal were now staring at him with expressions of wonder, respect, and even awe. The woman in the fur coat had tears running down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. The businessman sat with his hands clasped tightly together, as if he was praying. The teenagers in the back row looked stunned and humbled. Even the janitor had set down his mop and was wiping his eyes with his sleeve. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the only sound in the concert hall was the gentle echo of the final note slowly fading away. Marcus had just done something extraordinary. He had taken a room full of angry, prejudiced people and completely changed their hearts. Through the power of music alone, he had proven that talent and beauty could exist in the most unexpected places. He had shown that a person's worth had nothing to do with their clothes or their social status. Most importantly, he had demonstrated that music truly was a universal language that could speak to anyone, regardless of their background or beliefs. Marcus sat at the piano bench, hardly believing what had just happened. For the first time in his life, he had been able to share his gift with others. For the first time, people had listened to him not with disgust or pity, but with genuine appreciation and respect. The silence stretched on, filled with the weight of realization and the beauty of the music that still seemed to hang in the air. Everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed something special, something that would change their understanding of what it meant to be human. The silence in the concert hall stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Marcus sat at the piano bench, his hands still resting on his knees, afraid to move or make any sound. He could feel hundreds of eyes staring at him, but now they felt different than before. The angry, disgusted stares had been replaced by something else entirely. Marcus slowly turned to look at the audience. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. The woman in the fur coat, who had called him disgusting and demanded his removal, was crying openly. Tears streamed down her face, leaving dark streaks of mascara on her cheeks. Her expensive makeup was completely ruined, but she did not seem to care at all. The businessman who had been so worried about security was staring at Marcus with his mouth slightly open. His hands were pressed together in front of his chest as if he was praying. His eyes were wide with amazement, like he had just witnessed something impossible. The teenagers who had laughed at his dirty clothes were silent and still. Tyler, the boy who had made fun of Marcus's appearance, was shaking his head in disbelief. He knew how difficult the piece was that Marcus had just played. He had been struggling with the same music for months with the best teachers money could buy, and this homeless boy had just played it better than Tyler ever could. Mrs. Patterson, the strict teacher who had worried about diseases and proper procedures, was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. In all her years of teaching music, she had never heard a performance that moved her so deeply. This boy had no formal training, no expensive lessons, no perfect technique. But he had something that could not be taught in any classroom, even the janitor. Mr. Johnson stood at the back of the hall with tears in his eyes. He had grabbed Marcus so roughly that morning, treating him like a criminal. Now he felt ashamed of his harsh actions. He had never imagined that the dirty boy he found sleeping in the building could create such beautiful music. The silence continued, heavy with emotion and realization. Marcus could see that every person in the room had been changed by what they had just heard. Their faces showed wonder, respect, and something that looked almost like worship. It was as if they had just witnessed a miracle. Little Sophia, the daughter of the woman in the fur coat, broke the silence first. "Mommy," she said in her clear, innocent voice, "that was the most beautiful music I ever heard. Why are you crying?" Her question seemed to wake everyone from their trance. The woman looked down at her daughter and tried to wipe away her tears. "I am crying because that music was so beautiful it made my heart feel too full," she said softly. "And I'm crying because I was mean to the boy who made that music, and I should not have been." Mrs. Whitman, who had been standing at the side of the stage, was the first adult to move. She walked slowly toward the piano, her own eyes filled with tears. She had believed in Marcus when no one else would, but even she had not expected anything quite like this. "Marcus," she said gently, "that was absolutely extraordinary. In my 40 years of music education, I have never heard anything more beautiful or more moving." Her voice was filled with genuine awe and respect. Marcus looked up at her with confusion and hope mixed together on his face. "Was it really good?" he asked quietly. "I know my technique is not perfect. I know I do not play the way people who have real lessons play. I just tried to make it sound like how the music feels inside my heart." "Oh, my dear boy," Mrs. Whitman said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, "technique can be taught. Proper finger positions and correct posture can be learned from any competent teacher. But what you have cannot be taught. You have a gift that comes from somewhere much deeper than any classroom." Slowly, people in the audience began to stir. The businessman stood up first. His face was serious and thoughtful as he looked at Marcus. "Young man," he called out in a voice that was much gentler than before, "I owe you an apology. I judged you without knowing anything about who you really are. What you just did was remarkable." Other people began to stand as well. The woman in the fur coat rose from her seat, her expensive dress wrinkled from sitting so still during the performance. "I am so sorry," she said to Marcus, her voice breaking with emotion. "I said terrible things about you. I was wrong. Completely wrong." One by one, members of the audience got to their feet. Parents who had demanded Marcus's removal now looked ashamed of their earlier behavior. Teachers who had worried about proper procedures realized that they had nearly missed witnessing something extraordinary. Students who had made cruel jokes felt embarrassed about their thoughtless words. Mrs. Whitman began to clap. The sound of her applause echoed through the silent hall like thunder. Slowly, tentatively, other people joined in. First one person, then 2, then 5, then 10. Within moments, the entire audience was applauding, but this was not ordinary applause. This was the kind of clapping that comes from deep inside, when people have been truly moved by something special. It started quietly and grew louder and more enthusiastic as more people joined in. Marcus sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. He had never been applauded before. He had never been appreciated or celebrated for anything. The sound of all those hands clapping for him was almost too much to believe. The applause continued and grew stronger. People were not just clapping politely because they thought they should. They were clapping because they wanted to express their amazement and gratitude for what they had just experienced. Tyler, the teenage pianist who had been making fun of Marcus earlier, started shouting, "Bravo! Bravo!" over the applause. His friends looked at him in surprise, but soon they were cheering too. Other students joined in with their own shouts of appreciation. The woman in the fur coat was clapping so hard her jewelry was making noise. She was still crying, but now they were tears of joy and wonder rather than sadness. "Beautiful," she called out to Marcus. "Absolutely beautiful." Even the janitor was clapping enthusiastically from the back of the hall. He had set down his mop and was applauding with the same energy as everyone else. The man who had been ready to call the police on Marcus just hours earlier was now celebrating his incredible talent. In the midst of all the applause, a man with a camera and notepad appeared at the back of the hall. He was a reporter from the local newspaper, who had been visiting the academy to write a story about their music program. Instead, he had witnessed something much more newsworthy. The reporter quickly began taking pictures of Marcus at the piano and scribbling notes about what he had just heard. He knew immediately that this was a story that needed to be told. Homeless boy with extraordinary musical talent was exactly the kind of human interest story that would capture people's hearts. As the applause continued, Mrs. Whitman raised her hands to quiet the audience. Gradually, the clapping died down, though people remained standing and looking at Marcus with new respect and admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Whitman announced, "I think we have all learned something very important today. We have learned that talent and beauty can come from the most unexpected places. We have learned that we should never judge someone based on their appearance or their circumstances." She turned to look at Marcus, who was still sitting at the piano in amazement. "Marcus, you have given us all a gift today. You have shown us what music really means. You have reminded us why we love music in the first place." The audience began applauding again, even more enthusiastically than before. Marcus felt his cheeks burning with embarrassment and pride. He had never imagined that his music could have such an effect on people. A woman near the front of the audience raised her hand. "Mrs. Whitman," she called out, "what can we do to help this young man? He clearly has extraordinary talent. Surely there must be something we can do." Other voices joined in with the same question. "Yes, how can we help?" asked one parent. "What does he need?" asked another. "Can we set up a fund for his education?" suggested a third. Marcus listened to all these offers of help with growing amazement. Just hours ago, these same people had wanted him thrown out of the building. They had called him names and treated him like he was dangerous or worthless. Now they were offering to help him in any way they could. The transformation was complete and overwhelming. Marcus had walked into the concert hall as a despised homeless boy that everyone wanted to get rid of. Now he was leaving as a celebrated young musician that everyone wanted to support and encourage. Mrs. Whitman smiled as she listened to all the offers of assistance. "I think," she said thoughtfully, "that Marcus and I need to have a long conversation about his future. But I can promise you all that this young man's talent will not go to waste. We will find a way to give him every opportunity to develop his incredible gift." The applause erupted once more, louder and longer than ever. Marcus finally stood up from the piano bench and took a small bow, still hardly believing that any of this was really happening. His life had just changed forever, and it all started with a simple act of kindness from one person who was willing to listen with her heart instead of her eyes. The reporter from the local newspaper worked quickly to get the story ready for the next day's edition. He had taken dozens of pictures of Marcus at the piano and interviewed several people who had witnessed the incredible performance. By evening, the headline was already written: "Homeless Boy's Piano Performance Brings Concert Hall to Tears." The story appeared on the front page of the newspaper the next morning. It told about Marcus's difficult life on the streets and his amazing musical talent. The article described how he had taught himself to play on a broken keyboard and how his performance had completely changed the minds of everyone who heard him. Within hours of the newspaper hitting the stands, Marcus's story was everywhere. Radio stations talked about the homeless boy who played piano like an angel. Television news programs showed the pictures from the concert hall. Social media posts about Marcus spread across the internet faster than anyone could count them. People from all over the city called the Harmony Music Academy wanting to help. Some offered money for Marcus's education. Others offered to donate instruments or music books. A few families even called to ask if they could provide Marcus with a home. Mrs. Whitman spent the entire day answering phone calls and reading emails from people who had been moved by Marcus's story. She was amazed by how many people wanted to help a boy they had never met, all because of one beautiful piano performance. The first important call came from the Johnson family. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were a middle-aged couple whose own children had grown up and moved away. They had been looking for ways to give back to their community when they read Marcus's story in the newspaper. Mrs. Whitman, Mrs. Johnson said over the phone, my husband and I would like to offer Marcus a place in our home. We have a large house with plenty of space, and we would be honored to help such a talented young man. Mrs. Whitman was touched by their offer. That is very generous, she replied. Would you like to meet Marcus and talk with him about this? The Johnsons agreed immediately and arranged to come to the academy that afternoon. Meanwhile, Marcus was experiencing his first full day as a student at the Harmony Music Academy. Mrs. Whitman had enrolled him immediately after his performance, offering him a complete scholarship that would cover all his lessons and expenses. Marcus could hardly believe he was really there. He had his own practice room with a real piano that worked perfectly. All the keys made sound when he pressed them. The piano was properly tuned and had a rich, beautiful tone that made even simple scales sound wonderful. Other students at the academy treated Marcus very differently now than they had the day before. Instead of staring at him with disgust, they looked at him with curiosity and respect. Word had spread quickly about his incredible performance, and everyone wanted to hear him play again. Tyler, the teenage boy who had made fun of Marcus's appearance, approached him during lunch break. Hey, Tyler said nervously, I wanted to apologize for what I said yesterday. That was really mean, and I am sorry. Would you maybe want to play piano together sometime? I could learn a lot from listening to you. Marcus was surprised by Tyler's friendly attitude. You do not need to apologize, he said quietly, and I would like to play music with you. Maybe you could teach me some of the technical things I never learned properly. By the afternoon, news trucks had arrived outside the academy. Reporters wanted to interview Marcus about his story and his plans for the future. Mrs. Whitman protected him from most of the attention, but she did allow one television interview that would help people understand Marcus's situation better. The interviewer was a kind woman who asked gentle questions about Marcus's life and his love of music. When she asked him to play something on camera, Marcus chose a simple, beautiful piece that he had learned by listening to street musicians. The performance was broadcast on the evening news, reaching thousands more people with his story. That afternoon, the Johnson family arrived at the academy to meet Marcus. They were warm, friendly people who immediately made Marcus feel comfortable. Mr. Johnson was a retired teacher, and Mrs. Johnson worked as a nurse at the local hospital. They had spent their lives helping others, and they wanted to help Marcus, too. We have read about your story in the newspaper, Mrs. Johnson said with a kind smile. We would be very happy if you would consider staying with our family while you continue your music education. Marcus looked at Mrs. Whitman, who nodded encouragingly. They are good people, Marcus, she said. I think you would be very happy with them. Do you really want me to live with you? Marcus asked the Johnsons, even though I have been homeless? Even though I do not know how to act in a nice house? Mr. Johnson knelt down to Marcus's eye level. Son, he said gently, what matters to us is not where you have been, but who you are inside. And from what we saw in that newspaper story, you are a very special young man. The arrangement was settled that same day. The Johnsons took Marcus shopping for new clothes and personal items. For the first time in years, Marcus had clean clothes that fit him properly. He had his own toothbrush, his own bed, and his own room with a small piano that the Johnsons had bought specially for him. Over the next few weeks, Marcus settled into his new life. He attended regular classes at the academy every morning, learning music theory, sight reading, and proper piano technique. In the afternoons, he worked with Mrs. Whitman on advanced pieces that would help him develop his natural talent. The Johnsons treated Marcus like their own son. They helped him with his homework, took him shopping for necessities, and made sure he had everything he needed to succeed. Marcus had never experienced this kind of stable, loving family life before, and it took some time for him to believe it was real. Mrs. Johnson taught Marcus basic things that other children learned at home, like how to use a washing machine, how to organize his school supplies, and how to set a proper table for dinner. Mr. Johnson helped him with subjects like math and history that he had missed during his time on the streets. As the weeks passed, Marcus's playing continued to improve dramatically. With access to quality instruments and professional instruction, his natural talent flourished. Mrs. Whitman worked with him on technique while encouraging him to keep the emotional depth. That made his playing so special. Her music teachers at the academy were amazed by Marcus's progress. In just a few months, he was playing pieces that usually took students years to master. But more importantly, he brought a level of feeling and expression to his music that touched everyone who heard him play. The local newspaper continued to follow Marcus's story, reporting on his progress and his adjustment to his new life. People from around the city came to the academy hoping to hear him perform. Mrs. Whitman decided to organize a special concert to showcase Marcus's improvement and to thank everyone who had helped him. The concert was scheduled for 6 months after Marcus's first performance at the academy. It would be held in the same concert hall where he had first amazed the audience, but this time it would be a proper, formal recital. As the date approached, Marcus felt nervous but excited. He had chosen a program of pieces that told the story of his journey from the streets to his new life. The music would begin with sad, haunting melodies that represented his difficult past, and end with joyful, hopeful pieces that celebrated his bright future. The night of the concert, the hall was packed with people. Many were the same parents and students who had witnessed his first performance. But there were also many new faces, people who had heard about Marcus's story and wanted to support him. The Johnson family sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Mrs. Whitman introduced Marcus to the audience, telling them about his remarkable progress and the bright future that lay ahead of him. When Marcus walked onto the stage, he looked completely different from the scared, dirty boy who had first sat at that piano. He wore a crisp black suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was neatly combed, and his hands were clean and well cared for. But most importantly, he carried himself with confidence and dignity. As he began to play, it was clear that all the technical training had only enhanced his natural gift. His playing was now both emotionally powerful and technically excellent. The audience listened in complete silence, moved once again by the beauty of his music. The concert was a tremendous success. When Marcus finished his final piece, the audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. Many people were crying, remembering the first time they had heard this remarkable young man play. After the concert, people lined up to congratulate Marcus and to tell him how much his music meant to them. The woman in the fur coat who had been so cruel during that first encounter brought her daughter Sophia to meet him. "Marcus," she said, with tears in her eyes, "I want to thank you for teaching me an important lesson about not judging people. You have made me a better person." Little Sophia gave Marcus a drawing she had made of him playing piano, with musical notes floating all around. As the evening wound down, Marcus stood with the Johnson family and Mrs. Whitman looking out at all the people who had come to support him. Just 1 year earlier, he had been sleeping in alleys and searching through garbage cans for food. Now he had a loving family, a world-class music education, and a future full of possibilities. Mrs. Whitman put her arm around Marcus's shoulders.